Hello there, and welcome to All About That Place, this collaboration between the Society of Genealogists, the British Association for Local History, and the Society for One Place Studies. My name is Janet Barry, and I'm the current chair of the Society for One Place Studies, and it's my privilege to kick this celebration of local and family history off by interviewing the fabulous Melanie Caldicott about her two One Place studies and her experiences of her first year in conducting a one-place study. Melanie has two studies, as I mentioned. She's studying Gilmorton and Catthorpe, both in Leicestershire. So Melanie, please can you tell us what was it that led you to start these one-place studies in the first place?
Yeah, well, I first started Gilmorton when I heard about doing one place studies, and it seemed to make sense in relation to my own family history and one of the one name studies that I also um, conduct, which so my family, my maternal grandmother was from her surname was Measures, and they descend from Gilmorton, which is a village just inside Leicestershire, and the Measures family were quite prominent for quite a long time in that little village. So I decided to do that as a one place study because I thought it would enhance my knowledge of my own family history, but also of the Measures surname, which is the surname study that I also research. And yeah, it's been really interesting. And it's only about 7 or 8 miles away from where I live as well. So it's convenient enough to be able to nip along to and sort of wander about and visit it in person. So I don't just rely on online records.
That's good. It makes it easier, although it is perfectly possible to do a one-place study if you don't live in the location. It just means there's different challenges.
Yeah.
So, how have you found that conducting your one place study has enhanced your family and your one name study?
Um, I think it's definitely provided a context for me for knowing where that part of my family were rooted in. And I think what's interesting about it, looking at it slightly from different angles, from the angle of the place, the angle of the surname, and the angle of my own family, is that I'm starting to make connections between the Measure surname and then all the other surnames that were prominent families within the village. And start to realize how we're all interconnected and interrelated. So yeah, so that's been really interesting to start to discover. And eventually I'd like to start joining the dots a little bit more with DNA as well. I've done an autosomal DNA test with Ancestry, but I haven't started going down the rabbit hole of tracking all the different Gilmorton connections yet, but that's a fun job to do in the future.
We will book you for a future talk when you've done that. That'll be fascinating. Good luck. Okay. So in the you're finding, am I correct, that the different angles of your family, the surnames and the places are interconnecting and making a
Mm.
more complete picture than anyone on their own?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What things have you found useful in conducting your study?
Well, I've been very fortunate because there was a great deal of history documented of the village by a local resident from another family that had a long history in the village called Martin Bloxham. And he's written a history of Gilmorton, which was, I think he wrote that in the early 20th century. And I've got that book, which is just invaluable. And then he's also published several family trees that relate to his own family history within the village, which I need to get to Leicestershire libraries to kind of look at because I haven't been able to get hold of them online. There's one online, but the rest of them I need to go and look at in the archives in person. Um, but I will come to those when I want to cover those do a deep dive into those particular families. But yeah, that's been incredibly useful. There's also a good local history society of the village who publish a lot online. I haven't connected with them yet because I've felt that my study is so small that I haven't wanted to raised my head above the parapet just yet, but I will communicate with them at some point, yeah. And hopefully we can collaborate a lot more with what they know and what I know.
And is there anything that you know now that you wish you knew 12 months ago?
I think methodology is usually my answer to this question with a lot to do with my research. I tend to be quite scattergun. I try various things. I follow lines of interest, and I have ventured down lots of research paths that haven't felt like they've been quite the right starting place. So I've sort of then reversed out of those research paths and gone down other paths. And I think what the Society of One Place Studies outlines in their advice about starting with census records is where I've ended up landing. I've tried a few of my own ideas, but actually the tried and tested methods of people who have experienced it before was definitely the best way. So I'm now going through all the censuses, and that helps me to build a really good framework for all the families. And I can then look at other records, but also I'm very interested in stories. So I do family reconstruction, but I do that with the purpose of them finding out more about those people's lives and those families' lives through newspaper archives and other, information that gives stories about who they were and bring them to life. So with the foundation of the censuses, I then want to start padding out those people's lives um, and bring colour to those with the stories.
Making them real people, not just
Yeah,
names on.
yeah.
And you've mentioned about the resources, the work of people who've done some work in this area before.
Mhm.
Is there any particular tools or books or other resources that you would recommend for people wanting to start a one place study for themselves?
I think if there is a local history society, I would definitely make contact with them. As I say, I haven't made contact with them yet, but they do have an awful lot online, and that has the benefit of bringing the local people's oral histories to my own study and my own research. That's what they've done a lot of. They've published a lot of oral histories. And because I think because they're based within the location, within the village, they are part of the community and therefore can tap into that far better than I can remotely. So I would definitely use avenues like that to enable you to research more to do with the community and the people of that community themselves. Yeah.
Okay. And what are your plans for your second year of conducting your studies?
Yeah, finish the censuses. And then, like I said, start looking into these families more in a deep dive. So I started on my website to list the family names and then publish stories relating to those specific surnames. And I'd like to then, once I've finished the censuses, go back to that and start publishing more stories relating to different families. And that way, I think it's helpful for people who are connected in some way to those families or the village to just look up information about their own, personal connections.
I understand that you're conducting two one-place studies and also two one-name studies. How do you find parceling up time and resources between four different projects?
Yeah, it's always tricky, and you get pulled into one area of research more when you're doing something excited and you perhaps neglect the others. But what I try and do, because I'm retired, I try and dedicate one day a week to each of my studies, and try therefore not to neglect anything for too long. It's not always easy, but that generally is how I do it.
And how do you organize your information? Do you use particular software? Are you a notebook person? Do you carry it all in your head?
I couldn't carry it all in my head. No, I do use genealogy software. I use Roots Magic, which works for all of my different research studies. I also organise a lot of my project management via Notion, which helps me keep track of where I've got up to in different projects, and I try and use it to keep myself accountable to finishing each of those projects, but inevitably I tend to get distracted and move on to new things. But at least it reminds me of something that I might have been doing 6 months ago that I got distracted away from, and then I can go back to where I left off.
And you've mentioned connecting with the local history societies. Are there any other people who you found to be helpful, fellow travellers and sources of advice and support?
I have, as I say, I haven't connected to the local history society yet. In my other one place study, I have that came about because I started doing research for a pub in the village. They wanted to find out the history of the pub, and so I volunteered to research for them. And that became something that the village as a whole were then interested about and wanted me to research for the village, which is a project for next year. And I decided, as it was a very, very tiny village, I may as well make it a one place study, and that will enable me to do all the background research and then help the village learn more about their history. And so the connections with that village are very personal, um, and and I'm in a dialogue with them, which is really helpful. However, the majority of that community are very recent sort of immigrants into that village. So there's very little knowledge about its history, and there aren't any families, to my knowledge, who have been there for the last 150 years or whatever. They all seem to be quite transient. So I think I'm going to bring more to them than they already know themselves.
Very much, Melanie. We've touched on a lot of areas that are going to be developed as All About This Place continues. We've talked a bit about the context of our places, our families, our surnames and their lives. We've talked a bit about moving from names to real stories and real people. We've talked about sources and methods and pitfalls, and about engaging the community. There's plenty to think about there, thank you, and plenty that will be developed as All About That Place continues. So thank you for listening. Bye-bye.